Welcome back to It's a Numbers Game, the podcast where we explore the realities of running and growing an MSP business. Now, it was just last week that we had David Middleton on the show, and the response was great, so much so that we knew we had to bring it back. David is finance director at Flotek, a technology business that's gone from 0 to 18 million in just 3.5 years, largely through acquisition. And the last time he gave us a brilliant insight into that journey. But we left the conversation feeling like we just scratched the surface and there was so much more to dig into. The financial nuts and bolts of running and scaling an MSP. Things like how you actually handle cost reconciliation when your suppliers bill you in 100 different ways. How you structure your finance team as you grow, where billing ends and customer service starts. So we called David back and he didn't disappoint. If you're running an MSP at any stage of growth, this one is packed with practical wisdom and some real honesty about what it takes to get the financial engine room of your business running properly.
Dave, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you again.
And we couldn't miss this opportunity to lift the lid on exploring what an MSP at scale does to manage their business and what that actually ends up looking like day to day in terms of financial structure, how you go about managing your business, reducing risk, funding growth. And yeah, so really, I reflect back to some of the conversations I have with MSPs about why things just aren't more automated. Like, why do we need all these people in finance doing things for us? Surely there must be a better way to do it. So yeah, maybe we could start with where you begun in your journey, acquisition one. What did your finance operation look like?
Quite basic, to be honest. So yeah, first acquisition of Gower, there was a bookkeeper in the team, and one of the directors, Mark, he was sort of looking after the finances. So we did a short handover period, and then it was very much just me and the bookkeeper, which is good because I think it'll be one of the things that we've been able to do as we've sort of grown so far is just always trying to keep an eye on the detail. And I think no matter where you're sort of growing to or what direction you're going in, is sort of always coming back to, the devil's in the detail, it's in the pennies and the pounds. So yeah, the finance structure was very simple. We did a flurry of acquisitions sort of early on, which brought the bookkeeper into the team and a billing manager from one of our acquisitions who was sort of a comms focused business. And that started to give a bit of structure to the team. So very much we've always had, from a finance perspective, an internal and external focus. So which members of the team are looking internally, so purchase ledger side mainly, who are external facing, which I think is important because I think it's also two quite different types of people, especially from a billing side of things. We very much see it as an extension of our service. So we have the same SLAs as our help desk team, internally and externally, because actually service doesn't stop when the project gets completed or when the ticket gets closed. So we've always had that sort of very clear split. And as I'm sure the conversations that you have with a lot of business owners from the billing side of things, it is, especially on an IT perspective, it can be weird and wonderful what you get through from your suppliers. So it is a bit of an octopus to grab hold of. So having that focus is quite important.
I just wanted to dwell on it actually briefly because I think it's a really key, interesting philosophy that your client-facing component of your finance team is deemed as part of the service team because it's client-facing, and therefore is part of that overall relationship. It's part of that client care. I think I wouldn't be surprised if that's a fairly unique view out there.
Yeah, I guess maybe some of it goes back to when we sort of set up what we wanted to be and how we wanted to grow. I think if you're growing through acquisition, you're constantly coming into new customers who didn't choose you. So you have to be on it.
It's almost like you have to work a bit harder, right?
Yeah, maybe a bit. And we're very we don't want to be the faceless corporate, but also there's elements of sort of corporate that you need as you scale as well. But the more you can try and smother with service, the better. And yeah, that goes through to acquisition as well, because there is always that sense of maybe trepidation from some customers. It's a step into the unknown. Everyone's always, the mates down the pub have had a bad experience from a supplier of theirs that's been acquired. So it doesn't just stop at service. And I think that's throughout all of our team, like the project delivery team as well. We've always had a core value from our side of sort of simplify, standardize, automate. We're a very systemized business. But then we've always been very, what does that mean for the customer? And Jay, our CEO, is very good at that. He will simplify problems down very quickly back to, well, what does it mean for the customer? Because you find yourself quite often, we'll be talking about a problem that is an internal problem for us. And actually, sometimes you need to stop and go, hang on, that's an us problem, not a end problem. We always need to remember, if you want to do what's right for the customer and sort yourself out internally to be able to do that, I guess.
And certainly one of the easiest ways to annoy a customer is to send an incorrect invoice and then collect the payment for that incorrect invoice if you really want to rub salt into the
And just one thing that just came into my head there, because we had a very upset client about it, was that we sent them a quote for a piece of work and the quote was over 2 pages and they didn't look at the second page. And then, days, weeks later, whatever, when we came around to talking about the quote, we said, well, no, that's not the price. The price is X, not Y. It was on the second page. And of course, that was our fault for putting it on the second page. But the point remains, you've got to kind of overthink every type of detail here in what could possibly go wrong. Okay, well, make sure you have please turn over or continued or something at the bottom.
Yeah, I think ultimately people are always going to be sensitive when it comes to money, naturally. And in finance, the chances are if you make a mistake, it's going to involve money. So, yeah, we've always been quite conscious of that. And as we've sort of matured as a team and we've sort of built our structure, especially from an external billing facing side, we sort of built more process around that in terms of going, well, how can we make this? One of our values is want to wow. So we always go like, well, how do we leave a customer with a wow? Because actually, often if you're dealing with your home broadband provider or whatever, you don't expect necessarily good service. When you get the good service, it maybe surprises you. And I think often when there's a billing mistake in whatever walk of life you're in, whoever that is with, there's that degree of skepticism. So actually, you can turn a bad situation into good by having that sort of service focus. That's why I've always sort of put an emphasis on it. If I sort of look back, you could argue we probably cause ourselves more work than we need to by having that focus. But I think in the long run, start with the end in mind. If you want to sort of have that positive experience, and we won't always get it right. It's impossible to always get it right. But I think your customers will remember how you dealt with it when it goes wrong. And I think I
was just going to say, I think there's something about in setting out that stretch level of service. We want to wow our clients, and with it also being inbuilt throughout the whole organization, including your billing team, so that your clients directly see that and experience it. There's now you're now setting the bar high. So you're saying, look, we operate at this high level. So we kind of expect you to operate at that level as well with us, i.e. you pay us on time, you're honest and feedback around our performance, you don't let things dwell, you deal with them up front, you give us the chance to fix things when things go wrong, things like that. So that kind of, high trust, highly aligned type of relationship, I think it's good to do all of that essentially, because as I said, I think it helps in sort of, when the tables are turned.
Yeah, I think I'm a big believer in karma. So I think if you try and do everything the right way, and sort of, it may be the case that in future you do need to call on that because you do make a mistake. Yeah, we've sort of had that approach of embedding, and I probably would encourage people to sort of think about it differently, because it is probably part of the function of a finance team or even an MSP that is a bit more forgotten about, or you can try and automate it away to be no touch, which is great. But again, it comes back to, is it great for you, but is it not great for the partner who you're engaging with? So I think that's why we've always taken that approach.
One of the most common conversations I have with MSP owners goes like this. We're busy, clients are happy, but the numbers never quite look how I think they should. And almost every time it comes back to the same thing. Not effort, not demand, but how the business is being valued and priced. And if I'm honest, it often runs a bit deeper than that. A lot of owners quietly undervalue what they do. They don't fully recognize the weight of responsibility, the experience they've built, or the impact they have on their clients' businesses. So pricing ends up lower than it should be, not by a design, but by a belief. It's incredibly common. We see it all the time. And it's something we help MSP owners work through in a structured, practical way, so the numbers start to reflect the true value of what they deliver. If any of this resonates, it's worth having a conversation. So just head over to mspfinanceteam.com and book a slot in my diary, or email me at adam@mspfinanceteam.com.
And billing in particular is one of the areas where automation has been fairly prevalent, and of course then there's an observation of that with any automation to make sure that what's been automated is what was intended. And of course it enables perhaps you to scale not necessarily finance people with revenue. Where I perhaps see the challenge is actually in terms of the other side, the cost side. And whenever you talk to people about cost of sale reconciliation, eyes roll and steam comes out of ears, and it's a pickle of a topic. How do you handle that?
Well, I wouldn't say we've got it perfect. I think it very much depends. So again, it probably comes talked about in terms of, I think if you're growing your business organically versus growing through acquisition, I think they are two quite different things. So we've always had a core part of our strategy is to simplify, standardize, automate. But when you acquire, one of the things you need to make sure you realize when going into it is you're going to be dealing with imperfect information. So you could have your beautiful MSP set up in a certain way. If you want to go and do an acquisition, you need to accept that what you're going to bring in is not going to be that beautiful MSP, and you're going to have to work with what you've got. So your processes need to be able to accept imperfect information, and there's probably no substitute really just for getting stuck in and hard work to do that. I think certainly from my experience, where we see ourselves as a technology business, so we do the IT and comms, we very much see ourselves as specialists of both. We find probably the comms side of things that suppliers are a lot more accustomed to service billing. IT side, it's very much more haphazard. And I think it's probably going back to remembering how you're commercializing your products, how are you bundling, how are your suppliers then billing you against those bundles. Probably just accepting a degree of tolerance and going. So we work on a standard cost basis. So we know we bundle 10 products into one, and we know all those suppliers will bill us in different ways. But so long as when we look at it, we'll look at it on a per client basis, but then also on a standard cost basis, and know that actually there is going to be some ups and downs in there. It's the very nature of how it's billed to us. But so long as the standard cost model works, then I'm quite happy. And then there is areas you can go into more detail, and it'll also depend on your margins that you're making on different products as well. So we'll want to be a lot more accurate on our Microsoft billing because of the margins we make versus AN of the product, where the margins are much more generous.
And we talk about a standard margin. Effectively, you're setting a budget. This is what we can spend, and as long as our spend is within this, then there's a tolerance. So how do you correlate the two?
Yeah, so what we'd set out is we'd say across, call it 10 products that are sold, there may be support bundles and specific add-on products on the side. How many units are we billing out of those? What are the constituent parts of those bundles? How many are we billed against that? So if I'm expecting 5,000 of a certain product and I'm billed within a tolerance of that or less than, then I know that it's covered in my bundle. And there may be some instances where products that we bundle within our support are based on different factors, whether it's devices or users. And you just need to build your structure to know what's going to be an add-on, what's going to be accepted within our bundle tolerance. And that's the approach that we've taken. But I think, yeah, certainly on an IT side of thing, we do see a lot more weird and wonderful methods of billing. And like I said, with doing it through acquisition, you are always dealing with that imperfect information, which is one of the reasons we sort of have this massive focus on integration and alignment. So we don't want to have 15 different suppliers for a single product. Everything needs to come back to our product because that's how we build our processes around. But it's not the work of an instant to do that. But I think if you are looking at doing an acquisition, you do need to consider that. You could wait and find the perfect fit that perfectly aligns with all of your vendors, but you'd probably be waiting a while. Or, you accept the imperfect fit and have a plan in place to align that.
And going back to the product margins, do you know your margins at a per product level? Or is it sometimes per product and sometimes at a package level?
Sometimes product, sometimes package, depending on what we've bundled where.
Okay.
And then we report on sort of higher up levels in our accounts. So I've heard on your podcast before talking about sort of chart of accounts and how we report. To the way that we sort of set up as our chart of accounts probably a bit more simple, but we know that actually we've got the detailed billing analysis separately that we can refer between and sort of reconcile from there. And that's just the approach that we've taken to now.
The key thing here is, I guess, without putting words in your mouth, that you're monitoring these margins on a monthly, quarterly basis?
I'd say monthly.
You've
There's
data
probably
going back literally years now. This is just routine. You know, at any stage that your margins are healthy or not, or if a vendor's price goes up, then you know that there's action there. You know, you're all over it from a feel of margin and profitability.
Yeah, and I think, and again, it depends on how people commercialize the products, but you may look at some products and say, okay, if there's a variance, we'll wait a quarter to see if the variance settles down, and then we'll build the increase. So depending on the product, we might take that view. And what I'd probably also say is, depending on the product, is make sure you're on top of how you're able to get this information. We have some suppliers where we can get the information at a point in time. So if I wanted to see what we were billed for a year ago on a line-by-line basis, I won't be able to get hold of it. So you need to have your processes in place to make sure you're capturing that information so you can go back through it.
And this definitely isn't entirely automatable. So is this an area where you end up scaling people in the team to be owning this observational and processing activity?
Yeah, I think going back to some of our sort of principles of simplify, standardize, automate, and sort of start with the end in mind. They're sort of two that we hold like very dearly in our billing team. And I think there's parts of our process that we accept that we can't automate right now, but we want to make sure that we're putting steps in place so we are able to automate it in future. And I think sometimes that ends up causing you more work in the short term, but you know you're setting yourself up well for the future. And I do think it takes discipline to be able to do that, because it does cause you more work in the meantime. So you need to have your light at the end of the tunnel of where is it that we're heading. And yeah, I always say that sometimes systems don't talk, they whisper. But so long as you keep making iterate towards where you want to get to, then you will just keep refining that more and more. And I think I've developed a new hobby over the weekend, like my friend Claude now, coding everything. And I think as it is the buzzword about AI, but as that becomes smarter and smarter, I think people will have a lot more agency to be able to build their own ways of reconciling. And there's a lot smarter ways than Dave in his spreadsheet or AN off-the-shelf product, because AN off-the-shelf product won't necessarily work the way that you've built your business to work, and you don't want to build your business to work how AN off-the-shelf product has been built to work as well.
Very interesting. And you actually touch on a conversation I was having this week around where some of these sort of spot products, they do a particular thing, but actually they could very easily be superseded by something homemade or AI made. And you'd end up with something a lot more specific to your needs at a much reduced cost. But what happens then? Then we end up with a collection of lots of bespoke things that aren't necessarily easy to support. Do you have a way of, or maybe it's early days for you, of sort of reconciling that process? You can move quickly and add automation, but yeah, about that.
You can't go too far wrong with the spreadsheet, but maybe I'm stuck in my ways. I think sometimes the simple ways are just the best, and actually you can try and automate something until your eyes bleed, but actually sometimes the best way to do it is to just get the data in front of you and just work through it. And sometimes you just got to accept it just takes a while. Depending on what you're working with, sometimes that is just the answer, in my experience. And I think that's maybe why there is that sort of frustration with that sort of the cost reconciliation side of things, because things can come through in a weird and wonderful way. And I think if you're not on it, then they can quickly sort of slip away from you. I think if you spent the time to look into it in detail, sometimes I think depending on what vendors you're working with, you're probably quite alarmed what you find. Yeah, units can creep up.
And again, but this is why we standardize, right? This is why we don't have 150 products. We maybe have 20, and maybe there's 10 vendors max, right? Because otherwise we're just building in complexity. So because it is difficult to get away completely from some level of manual effort, there's always edge cases. So yeah, for me, it's about limiting the number of parts effectively, accepting there's going to be a degree of routine, try and make it as much of a process as you possibly can, doing the same thing each month, every month at the same time, following some kind of checklist, right? Just to keep errors reduced, and accepting that you need to build in the cost of that into your margins, ultimately, right? There's an overhead.
Yeah.
When you sell something, there's also the administration behind it, isn't there? So,
yeah, and I'd also probably add to that is it's a different skill set and a different mindset of the person who will be able to focus on doing that to the person who's provisioning it, or the person who is ordering it, or the person who is invoicing it. They are different personalities, different skill sets. So it's not always possible to have 3, 4, 5 different people doing those things at a smaller scale. But equally, I think if you set out that you're setting your business and you're setting your commercials and your products up for scale, then you build around that. And I think from our perspective, I think it definitely wouldn't be possible if all the bits weren't in place earlier in the process, because at the end of the day, the billing and the finance function sits at the end. We can influence what happens at the start, we can influence what happens in the middle by putting controls in place, but you need culturally that alignment right from sales, who won't always be the best at it, much as they'll try, through like how we structure it into our projects team to deliver it, and have that culture throughout your business of this is how we do it, and build that process in. I think if everyone through the customer journey of a service going live doesn't align to that, then you're always going to fall down.
And an important point you raised there, and I think going back to how you've scaled through acquisition rather than organically, I guess you've had lumps of finance work arrive on your doorstep versus the organically developing business, which will reach certain points where the team's just too stretched and now we add another person. And I wonder if we can hazard a guess as to what the correlation between the finance team size and the income might be. And of course, there's a huge variety of different elements in there. But yeah, is it like a person a million, or is there a way of making it easier for our listeners to think about, am I expecting too much or not expecting enough from the function that I've got now?
I'd probably say it depends. Also, I'd say it depends. I'd say it would depend on what you're looking to get out of it. So if you're at a size or a position in your life cycle as a business where you want that extra level of detail and granularity in your reporting, then you've got to accept that comes at a cost to be able to put that in place, because it's not just reporting on it and producing a pack. You've got to have everything in place before that to be able to have the output. I can't swear, but if you put rubbish in, you'll get rubbish out.
Swearing is allowed, by the way. Yeah.
Was it? Sure.
You have a bleeping machine, yeah.
There we go. I'd have been safe. So I think it depends on what you're looking to get out of it. If you're not scaling rapidly and not much is changing in your business month to month, then you won't need as much resource to sort of grab onto what's changing. If you have constant change, then that will come with that extra level of resource that you need, because otherwise you won't get the level of insight that you want. And I think from our perspective, early days, I just worked hard, to be honest, because every pound needed to stay in the business rather than scaling a team. As we matured as a business and stabilized more and had momentum and built out our sales function, so actually we had increasingly reliable levels of business coming through every month, then you can take that view and go, well, actually now we want to invest so that maybe it's freeing me up to work on another project in the business, or maybe it's dealing just simply with volume and making sure that you've got enough volume to deal with what's coming if we're doing another acquisition in the next couple of months. don't know if that answers your question.
I think it does, and a really interesting point about what level of data you require, and therefore what insight you're likely to be able to gain from it as well. And if you have one bucket that's all of your resold stuff, and as long as the margin roughly looks right, then actually that's all right. We're happy. If you want to be able to go in and interrogate that, then there does need to be more accuracy and layers of information below. And equally, there is always the opportunity to work really hard at something and ultimately to bridge the gap. The final point, which you mentioned there, which I think is a really interesting one, is where finance begins and where sales administration ends. So do you have distinct teams within your organization that do order processing, for example, and then accounts payable, accounts receivable? And is that sales or is it finance?
It's a bit of a blend. So the way that we've sort of structured our team, we have an account management function. Their focus is looking after our partners, and they will do primarily the quotes that they'll be doing will be project-based quotes where it may be an upgrade or a new solution or a new system that someone's purchasing. If it's processing an order, we have what we call our customer relations team, and they basically support the account managers. So that is looking in QBRs with our partners and processing orders that come through, whether that's the laptop and sort of thing. So where it is more probably cookie cutter from that perspective, we have our sort of defined catalogue, and that would get fed through. When that quote is signed, that goes into the projects team, and they're in charge of procurement and delivering the project. And then that's when it comes through into finance. And then what we've built out in our finance team is then controls around how do you make sure that the costs are captured correctly along the way? How do you make sure that repeat issues are addressed at the source? Because I think you also, sales need a degree of flexibility to function as well. Like they'll be the lifeblood of the organization. I think when we hear people have tried sales and it didn't work, generally those businesses then magically don't grow. You need to get your sales function working effectively to have sustained growth. We won't be able to invest in the rest of our business with them. And that's why we sort of built systems around that to support them and make sure they can't go too far off course. I think it's sort of acres in their places and making sure that actually as much as their time can be spent account managing or selling. So for our new business team, we don't want them doing, them going out, meeting potential, sitting new business appointment. Yeah, you've got to make sure you're freeing your team up to do what you've brought them in to do. Also make sure they've got enough, I think, so people move away from the detail too much. So if our account managers never processed any order, I think that would create its own challenges as well. I think you need that level of boots on the ground, knowing how your systems work to function correctly. But maybe that's just my accountant mind. But our most effective, probably account managers, have that understanding and are quite self-sufficient from that perspective.
Really interesting. And of course, I propose there that there's like a sales admin function, but actually sales admin can quite easily be junior account management. And that then becomes a progression for someone in, if they understand how to pick the right laptop for a particular client, then they're actually along the way to being able to make other solution recommendations to their client, to their end client and develop. So yeah, no, really interesting. And I guess we have managed to, I think, to confirm in this conversation that there are distinct roles, even if in the smaller business, perhaps those roles are held, one person holds multiple roles, but there are distinct roles. And the more you can separate them out, the more, yes, you create perhaps an overhead of managing those roles and how they interact, but ultimately there's a cross-checking that goes in there as well. Not I think even marking their own homework.
I think even if it is that people wear multiple hats at different stages of the business, it will always happen at different stages of the business. But I think so long as those responsibilities are clearly defined along the way, you become able as you grow to then split them out more. But yeah, along our journey, we've always had people wearing multiple hats until we get to a scale that actually, you can separate out the new business from the account management. You can separate out the CR team from the account management team and all of that. But all of that comes with growth. So Without sales, you can't grow. Without growth, you can't invest.
Wise words indeed, and perhaps a good place to draw the episode to a close. What are our takeaways from this? And Adam,
Well, I was just going to ask, I guess I'm just going to ask one kind of final question here. You've grown from 0 to what level of revenue today? 18 million. And that's in what time frame? 3.5 years. So by any standard, very rapid. So looking back 3.5 years, what would you wish you knew then that you now know?
Personally, bring people in sooner. I personally probably waited too long at various different stages of our growth to bring in. And so from a finance resource perspective, it's been probably lumpy. I think one of the big takeaways I'd probably say is all that time investment at the start to make sure we set out who we want to be and why we want to be that way, and set our business up for scale and make sure that everyone through the process understands that has its knock-on effect. So I think all that time spent at the start, putting those principles in place, putting those systems in place. If you build your house on sort of like sand, it's always going to sort of come down. So I think that time investment at the start was definitely worthwhile. So I think if people are looking to scale, put that time in. It will be extra cost, there will be extra overhead in the meantime, but you need to prepare your business for scale. And it needs to be a cultural thing.
And I think Adam, earlier you mentioned about getting the margins right. So even if you can sell something and make a lower margin today by not having that better infrastructure to support it, you should sell at the right price now to give that affordability to do things in the right way later on. Even if today you take it as extra margin and just have a very hard-working Dave in the background, sweating away. So yeah, really interesting conversation. I'm so glad we extended our previous chat to encompass this. Really interesting feedback. Of course, our listeners will already know how to get hold of you, but just in case they didn't listen to the first episode.
Yeah, just say, reach out to me. It's probably the quickest way to find me, and just drop me a message, and always happy to have a chat.
Super. Dave, thank you ever so much for joining us. And hopefully, I will see you definitely at some point during this year, and hopefully with some motor racing involved.
I look forward to it.
Thanks, David.
Thanks.